Considering how cartoony the world of wrestling is, it's not much of a surprise that catchphrases have become as popular as they are within the grapple sphere. From Stone Cold's bottom line to Roman Reigns' acknowledge me to basically everything Chris Jericho has ever said, slogans and buzzwords are as deeply entrenched in wrestling lore as anything else, making their way onto fan signs, t-shirts, and even the names of video games. But where do they come from? How do they get thought up? If only there was somebody close by with a list of some examples. Oh, hello. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 origin stories behind famous wrestling catchphrases. Join us. Number 10, Knight's Restaurant Raw. In recent years, nobody has come up with more popular catchphrases than LA Knight. Yeah! See, I just did one there and didn't even realise. The former Eli Drake has had a lot of time to work on his mic game, having spent years on the indie circuit and in TNA before joining WWE, but it turns out that one of his many lines actually has its origins away from the squared circle. As he told the After the Bell podcast, Knight used to work in a restaurant before he was a big-time wrestler. When carrying trays of food or drinks around, staff members would yell things like "corner" to let their colleagues know that they were coming through. Not LA Knight though, that would have been too easy. Instead, the future megastar used to shout "everybody" when he was coming past. In time, this was adapted into his "with everybody saying" catchphrase that is so madly over today. Number 9, Cole's borrowed line. It's getting to the point where it's almost impossible to say the words Adam Cole without immediately following them up with "Bay-Bay." Seriously, it's becoming a real problem. Somebody needs to find a cure for this, and fast. Anyway, it turns out that Cole's signature greeting comes from a combination of two former WWE stars. Longtime fans of Chris Jericho will remember that he used to shout "come on, baby" when attempting to pin opponents with one foot on their chest. Cole, a huge Jericho fan, took this and made it his own. Weirdly, Heath Slater also used to do this in WWE. Anyone remember that? As for the first part of the catchphrase, that originated when Cole was on the same indie show as Joey Matthews, the former Joey Mercury in WWE. Matthews had a theory that if he just shouted his name as many times as possible whilst on the show, then people would remember who he was. The Undisputed Era leader would take this advice to heart, and when put together with Chris Jericho's old saying, this approach would create one of the most over chants in modern wrestling. Number 8, Jarretts' foul-mouthed relative. Forget all of his great matches, his many title victories, or the fact that he created an entire bloody promotion. Jeff Jarrett's greatest contribution to wrestling and to culture in general is popularizing the phrase "slap nuts." Shakespeare on his best day couldn't have come up with something that perfect. The iconic saying was a big part of Jarrett's persona back in his WCW days, printed on t-shirts and on the back of guitars that Double J would use to clobber people. Considering how vulgar the phrase is, you might be surprised to learn that it owes its existence to Jarrett's sweet old grandmother. According to the man himself, Granny Jarrett used to call people who talk too much slappies, as in those who slap their gums too much. Her grandson liked the way this sounded, with the nuts part coming from the highly juvenile sense of humour that dominated the Attitude Era. Number 7, Foleys' good old inspiration. Jim Ross was a bit of a catchphrase machine back in the day, back when he actually still liked wrestling. From "good God almighty" to "business is about to pick up" to "tougher than a $2 steak," iconic lines just came naturally to JR. So it's no surprise that he was involved in the creation of somebody else's most famous sign-off. When Mick Foley was first brought into the WWE as Mankind, a big part of what got him over were his sit-down interviews with good old JR. As Foley said on his podcast, he was on set with Ross for a short interview segment one day when the Oklahoma native was struck by an idea. Foley said he just came up off the top of his head and said, "Say have a nice day," and then I ran with that. This was all the way back in the mid-90s, and the phrase has been associated with the Hall of Famer ever since, and was even the title of his first book. Of course, every day is nice when you're the hardcore legend, besides when you have to walk or stand up or generally move your body or anything. Love you, Mick. Number 6, Big Rons Kathon. Ron Simmons, aka Farouk in WWE, is a multi-time tag team champion, was a standout in college football, and was the first ever officially recognized African-American world heavyweight champion in wrestling history. And yet, a lot of people only know him as the guy who says, "Damn!" The world could be a cruel place, can't it? The catchphrase came about towards the end of his ass-kicking days, taking on a life of its own after Simmons retired from the ring when he would show up at random events when something weird was happening, say his word, and then leave. When appearing on WWE's The Bump, Simmons explained that damn originated from the times he would get genuinely frustrated by working a match. When something would go wrong in the ring or I would get hurt, the people within the first 6 or 7 rows could hear me say, damn, he explained. Each time we would come back to those towns, and the more I said it, the people started chanting it. WWE's writers caught on to this trend and decided to incorporate it into his character, connecting his career to those 4 letters forevermore. Number 5, the Road Warrior's Nightmare. Few things inspired more terror in wrestling than the opening sting of the Road Warriors' entrance music, mainly because it meant that their opponents were about to get beaten up for real. Oh, what a rush is as famous as it is taxing on your vocal cords to recreate, soundtracking so many of Hawk and Animal's most incredible moments. That said, it turns out that the line is not a Road Warrior original, as it first belonged to one of horror cinema's biggest stars, Freddy Krueger. In A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, Freddy kills someone by turning his fingers into syringes and injecting them. As the deed is unfolding, he mumbles to himself, "What a rush." Hawk saw the movie and decided to take that piece of dialogue for himself. And hey, if you're disappointed that the Legion of Doom didn't come up with the phrase themselves, then you've clearly forgotten that this was a team who lifted their entire look and name from Mad Max 2. You really should have seen this coming. Number 4, Graham's Saintly Slogan. Just one look at superstar Billy Graham should tell you that he's set the template for many future legends in the business. Unless you look at him during his weird karate fighter phase, nobody was in any rush to copy that. Aside from bulging muscles and a dyed blonde beard, one thing Graham also introduced to wrestling was the use of the word brother, which he was saying long before a certain real American. For this little character tick, Graham literally looked to the heavens for a little bit of divine inspiration. The superstar was a devout Christian, even taking his ring name from a famous evangelical preacher. He would often attend meetings where everyone would refer to each other as their brother or sister in Christ, which, when the in Christ part was dropped, slipped into his wrestling lexicon. Though the Hulkster may have made the word brother famous in a wrestling contest, it was Graham's nod to his religious backgrounds that gave him the idea. Number 3, Rock's Football Throwback. The origins of all the Rock's famous catchphrases would be enough to fill a large encyclopedia, as the Great One has as many zingers as he does nicknames, championships, and movie credits. The one we're focusing on today might just be his best, so much so that it became the first words of several of his entrance themes. If you smell what the Rock is cooking, not only marks the Brahma Bull's arrival, but it also usually marks his departure, as this is what he screams into the microphone when he's finished tearing someone apart. Sometimes he does it normally, sometimes he does a funny little tongue waggle just for good measure. Rock first heard someone use the "if you smell what I'm cooking" line when he was a football player at the University of Miami, where it would usually get some good laughs from his teammates. When he made the move to wrestling, Rocky decided to try it out on some of the boys backstage. The response was good, and a legendary wrestling phrase was born. Side note, has anyone ever worked out what he is actually cooking? My guess is a hearty casserole. Number 2, Flair's Rock and Roll Roots. At every wrestling show, every fan has to sign a contract that says whenever a performer does a chop or puts someone in the figure 4 leg lock, they must respond with a loud "woo!" This obnoxious noise serves as a tribute to Ric Flair, who not only popularized those 2 moves, but also the act of making a weird sound during random bits of one's promo. The woo, which is spelled with 5 O's according to Flair's trademark, is as synonymous with the Nature Boy as Rolexes and divorce papers, but the legendary grappler actually took it from the world of music. Flair has admitted that he borrowed his signature call from rock and roll icon Jerry Lee Lewis, particularly from the song Great Balls of Fire. The dirtiest player in the game was a fan of Lewis back in the 1970s, and whilst listening to him on the radio one day, decided that he would incorporate some of his act into his own. Lewis and Flair actually have more in common than you might think, as they're both very influential but highly problematic innovators of their respective fields. Look it up if you don't know. Number 1, Austin's annoying voicemail. Whether you hate the what chant or... Actually, I don't think anybody actually likes it, do they? Anyway, this monosyllabic cry is now baked into the foundation of the wrestling world, the scourge of any wrestler who leaves even a tiny gap in between parts of their promo. The man we have to thank for this highly irritating phenomenon is none other than Stone Cold Steve Austin, who probably should have had his Hall of Fame ring taken away for birthing this monstrosity. Austin would invite the crowd to chant what in between items that he would read out in a list before it took on a life of its own. But it turns out that another famous wrestler should get some credit for starting the chant, AEW's Christian Cage. The Rattlesnake tried to ring Christian one day, but was sent to voicemail. When asked to leave a message, Austin replied with a string of stupid sentences, each one punctuated with a loud "what?". After 2 whole minutes of harassing the poor man, the message was over, and nothing would ever be the same again. So if you needed any more of a reason to despise Christian Cage, then there you have it.